Hello and welcome to the Budgets Where Do I Even Start webinar, another fourth Coffee Talk webinar series episode or webinar. I'm Brent Bisking. I'm the Program Manager for Recruitment and Engagement at PAEA, and I'm here with Dr. Denise Rizzolo and Dr. Robbie Furter, and I'll hand it off to Denise to introduce Robbie.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for coming. So as you may have seen on, oops, I'm gonna have to mute one of you. If everyone can stay on mute until the end, that would be great. I'm sure Brent can help you with that. So as all of you know or have seen, this is a 6-part webinar series, and it's really finding your starting point in scholarship. And we welcome obviously PAs, but also anyone else in the part of the research community is welcome to join us. We have 2 more upcoming webinars on September 24th at 12 p.m. and it has to do with pitfalls in grant writing, and October 1st, and that's a really popular one. It's how you turn your dissertation into a publication. So I'm really happy to have Dr. Robbie Furter here today. He's our Chief Data Officer and Principal Psychometrician at the PA Education Association, who is going to talk to us about budgets. I'll hand it to you, Dr. Furter.
All right. Thank you, Denise. Hello, everyone. My name is Robbie Furter. Just want to say thanks to Brent and Denise for allowing me the chance to come here and talk with you all today. These Coffee Talk webinar series have been just a huge success, great conversations, everything like that. I'm looking forward to the next 2 as well. But thank you for taking the time to be here with us today as well. As Denise said, my name is Robbie Furter. I'm the Chief Data Officer and Principal Psychometrician here at PAEA. Been at PAEA for about 4 years in a couple of different roles, but always something involving assessment, research, and data. And again, today I'm going to talk with you about grant budgets. So here we have kind of the objectives for today. These are written as objectives. These are hopefully things that by the end of our conversation today, you're feeling more comfortable with. You feel like you have a little bit more guidance on and kind of heading into those next steps. I'll kind of treat this as a bit more of an agenda because this is how we're going to kind of work through the slides I have prepared today. So first, we're going to talk about why budgets are important, essentially the function that budgets play in grant proposals. Then we'll talk about what you should put in a budget, what needs to go in. We'll talk about common pitfalls and things like that afterwards. So again, kind of why budgets are important, then what should go in and what should not go in. And that'll structure our talk today. I should mention, I think if you have questions, put them in the chat. Denise and Brent are monitoring that. And so we will have time at the end. I will not talk for the full 30 minutes at you. And so there will be an opportunity for questions and everything like that at the end. So, but with that in mind, let's get started. So why are budgets important? And I have 4 bolded words kind of in each of these points here. And it's responsible or responsibly, align or alignment, sufficient or sufficiency, and feasible or feasibility. And those are kind of just really 4 main themes that come through when you're thinking about why your grant proposal budget is important. First of all, when you are submitting a proposal for a grant and you are working on that budget, some organization is agreeing to give money to you to carry out research. And so often they want to make sure that you're going to spend that money responsibly. It's kind of that base level that the funds that you're asking for, that they will actually be allocated responsibly and adequately to the project. That's obviously kind of number 1. The next one, alignment, is does the budget align to what you're trying to actually accomplish in your study or in your project? This is a big piece because of my former work in assessment and measurement and things like that. This always, to me, kind of sounds like validity when you're thinking about it. It's really, how are you going to align the funds that you're spending to ultimately answer those research questions? So again, it's looking at how do we align these different resources? How do we allocate resources in the right way that we actually are able to conduct this research, to we're actually able to eventually get to the results and conclusions that we want to get to. These next 2 kind of go together in an interesting way, and that's, is the budget sufficient to accomplish the proposed goals, and is the project feasible given the proposed budget? So it's kind of 2 guardrails on this, because when you are proposing for a grant and you have that proposed budget, the review committee is going to look at, okay, so is this actually enough money for them to ask? Is this the amount that they're asking for? Is this going to be enough for them to actually accomplish these proposed goals. And it could be the case where some projects wind up, submitting for funding to multiple grants, things like that, which you have to be really careful there to be really clear. Again, this goes back to the responsibility piece of how you're allocating this particular grant money to your project and the different alignment pieces. But then also, is it feasible? What is the amount of money you're asking for? Are you actually going to be able to accomplish what you're asking for? Are you actually going to be able to accomplish your project with those budget constraints? Budgets are a constraint on your research project. Of course, you are proposing, you're asking for funds to ease that constraint a little bit. But at the end of the day, research requires resources. It takes time, money, these different pieces. And so ultimately, the review committee who's reviewing your grant proposal is going to try to figure out, okay, can they actually accomplish this with the budget that they're asking for? So I touched on this a little bit a second ago, and because budgets are often kind of this thing that's off to the side, and you have this great research project idea, but then you're like, okay, but now I need funding, so I better go find a grant, do this budget and everything like that. And I would just encourage you to think about the budget kind of more as in line with the rest of your project, the rest of your study you're trying to conduct. Again, if you think about it, when you design the methods of your study, you're laying out the methods that you need to conduct that are going to be sufficient, that are going to be appropriate for the ultimate data you collect, the results that you're going to get out of analysis, and the conclusions you want to draw. I think that really you can think about your budget in a very similar way in terms of, what do you need to do? What are the actions and what are they going to cost? The different equipment, processes, things like that you're going to go through to get to this data results and so on. And so again, maybe that's a little too out there, or maybe it's not as analogous as I'm trying to make it. But I think that it could ease some of that tension when you're kind of stretching out and thinking about, okay, the budget piece that feels off to the side, it might make it a little bit easier for you to kind of rope it into the rest of your research project. And again, not make it feel so foreign. Because again, at the end of the day, what you're trying to get to and why your budget is important, it's you're trying to answer this question, which is going to come from the reviewers. How is your proposed budget going to actually allow you to accomplish your project? So again, I think that if you closely tie it to the methods in your research study and what you're trying to accomplish, it's not as disjointed and it doesn't feel as separate from the rest of your research project. All right, let's start moving into what should be included in a budget. I'm going to give general guidance here, but then I'm also going to use PAEA's faculty generated research grant as an example, the FGRG, just because it's helpful to kind of make some things concrete, because they also provide guidance. And that's something else that I'll get into when you actually think about proposing for a grant. Things like personnel, the principal investigators' salary, co-PIs' salaries, research assistants, other contractors, other technicians, things like that. Really any of the salary or any kind of the pay for people to actually do this work that might look like buying out time from an institution, things like that. But really the personnel costs are going to be an ask of just about every budget, every grant that you are proposing for. Fringe benefits are really kind of a subcategory underneath personnel, but they'll often ask for them to be split out because there needs to be kind of a clear picture of, okay, what's actually going towards salary versus those fringe benefits, such as if you're also having to cover part of retirement, health insurance, things like that. So oftentimes, even though they are part of personnel, grant applications might ask for you to separate those out. Equipment, just very basic definition here. They're the items necessary for your project's success. Oftentimes these might be things like actual machinery, sensors, readers, things like that to actually conduct your research project. These are actual pieces of equipment. And I know it's not good to use the word in the definition, but that's what it is. It's the equipment you need to actually carry out your project. Supplies are related, but supplies are those like more consumable pieces. They're things that you'll often use with your equipment or with the individuals participating in your study. These are things like software licenses that are eventually going to expire, lab materials. Again, they're consumables. They're not as evergreen or lasting like equipment is. So that's kind of the distinguishing point there, because that used to trip me up a little bit. And so that's the difference between equipment and supplies. With travel, often the grant will ask you to lay out any travel costs you expect to incur. Often this comes with disseminating the results of your study, such as presenting at a conference or something like that, or if there are costs associated with submitting to a journal, something of that nature. but also data collection. If you need to travel to collect data, this is where those funds would be allocated. We get into the participation costs. If you do expect to incur costs based on inviting participants to be a part of your study, incentives, recruitment costs, kind of whatever those are, you can also kind of roll in, and this is where you get kind of funny between supplies and participation costs. But if you're inviting people in, providing them with snacks, lunches, like things like that, things that you want to budget for to make sure that you're not actually get to that point. You're like, oh wait, what are we going to feed these people while they're here all day? And then administrative or indirect costs. Most often this comes in as overhead at an institution, but this is basically any funds that you're paying to use a facility or any kind of administrative or overhead costs there. So here's some kind of concrete guidance that's given by the FGRG. And again, I'm going to kind of refer back to this a little bit throughout to, again, just make it more concrete. But again, this is given by PAEA for that FGRG grant, but travel to present or conduct research. Again, we talked about travel funds on the previous slide. Salary, including fringe benefits for key personnel's direct contribution to the project. Again, think PIs, co-PIs, data analysts, technicians, things like that. Subcontracts. So again, any other kind of subcontracts that will result as part of this project that you are going to use grant funding for. Software relevant to the project, up to $5,000. So again, software really comes into that supplies section because it is usually consumable in the sense that it'll be a 1 year, 3-year license, whatever that software license is. And again, there is a limit that you can with the FGRG. The indirect costs up to 5%. So again, we talked about on the last slide, overhead, things like that. And really, this is in the interest to make sure that the grant funds are actually going to the work being done as opposed to just indirect costs as a part of doing business. The FGRG does allow curriculum evaluation to be part of the budget. You'll see in a couple slides, not curriculum development though. So they do draw a line between what you can use the grant funds for. And then participant incentives that are reasonable. And so again, you'll see a couple kind of key words in here. You see reasonable, you see relevant to the project. Again, this all gets back to how are you going to sufficiently and appropriately and responsibly allocate those funds to make sure that you're able to conduct your project and that the funds you're getting through the grant are really having the most impact in terms of pushing your project forward. So here's an example budget. This is from the FGRG again. This is available on PAEA's website, but if you're kind of hearing all these more abstract terms like, okay, but how do you actually lay this out? This is available again on PAEA's website and just kind of helps to lay everything out. You'll see at the top, we have the personnel laying out their role, if it's part of an FTE and kind of calculating out what the personnel costs will be. You can see fringe benefits are included as well. Excuse me. And then this separate table over here has things like supplies and materials. You can see that personal air pollution monitors that would fall under equipment that you are purchasing with grant funding. And then down at the bottom, there is the study incentive for the participation incentive. And that's in the interest of recruiting individuals to participate in the study, data collection efforts, things like that. So just some concrete examples to try to put some meat around the bones we're talking about. All right, so what should not be included? We talked about what you should include in your budget, what should not be included. Off to the side, I have these kind of common categories first, and then again, I'm going to show you some more concrete examples based on PAEA's grants. So some common categories are personal expenses. Again, these are pretty hard to justify. You look back at the criteria we've been talking about, and they're going to be a red flag to grant reviewers when they go through and they see anything like that. Entertainment, we talked about recruitment costs and participation incentives, things like that. Those are all justifiable, but things like social events and other things like that are going to be much harder to justify in the grant budget. And so recommend not including things like that because those are likely things that, again, that are going to be flagged and likely will not make it through the grant proposal process. Nice to haves. So this goes back a lot to, again, like what you actually need to get to accomplish the project, what you need the grant funds for. Again, we go back to that previous slide. We talked about software relevant to the project, participating incentives that are reasonable. So again, not trying to go too overboard here, not trying to get everything that you possibly could need to do the grant. You really want to demonstrate that you've thought through, this is the project and this is exactly the resources we'll need to accomplish it. And so again, you need to kind of cut those nice to haves. You don't want that to be the reason why you don't want to get a grant, because you effectively asked for more than you needed, for more than was sufficient to actually accomplish the project. And then costs incurred outside the grant period. These would be things that were like pre-grant or post-grant. Almost all grants are time-bound. And so you should not include any expenses that are going to be incurred before or after. Again, they're just not going to work with that. And again, that's a place to where they'll be struck from your budget pretty immediately when reviewed by a committee. So let's look at some concrete examples, and this comes with guidance. If you were to propose for PAEA's FGRG, this is what they would tell you, what you should not include in your budget. So capital equipment greater than $1,000. So again, capital equipment, those are going to be pieces of machinery for the most part, kind of those evergreen things that are going to last over time. And so, you're probably not going to get a new MRI machine as part of an FGRG, as part of a faculty research grant. And so that's just something to keep in mind. So if you do have capital equipment, you need to keep it under $1,000. Food and entertainment, other than food provided as a participant incentive. So again, that's kind of drawing that line between incentives and entertainment. And so you can offer incentives. You can feed participants for coming and being a part of your study, but those social events and entertainment are where you're going to kind of go outside the lines there. Computer hardware is not included. And so that's, again, an interesting distinction here. And I'll go down another one, a couple more. Software is, but not computer hardware. And again, that kind of falls in the computer hardware, also falls in the capital equipment kind of scope there. Again, you'd probably be hard pressed to find computer hardware that's going to be less than $1,000 these days anyway. And so that might be kind of nixed already. You see that curriculum development is here. So that is something that this particular grant, is not going to allocate funds to. And again, I'll go back to this here in a minute, but it's really important to whichever organization you're proposing for a grant is really to look at what their specifications are, because they will tell you things you can and cannot allocate budget funding to. And then software not directly relevant to the project. So again, excuse me, we see that piece right there, not directly relevant to the project. So a lot of these things here you'll see fall into that nice to haves kind of category. And so you really need to make sure that everything that you're proposing for in that budget, you clearly align what you're going to use it for, why it's instrumental to carrying out your project. And then training not directly related to the project. So again, not directly relevant to the project, not directly related to the project. You can see that these are then falling into these nice to have areas. And so you just need to be able to draw that clear alignment. All right, so I'm going to kind of wrap up here with some last thoughts, and then happy to stay on and chat, answer any questions, anything like that. The first piece here, do not be afraid to ask for help. If you are engaging in research, if you are proposing for grants, if you're at an institution, there are folks around you who have been through this process, possibly done it many times. Hopefully seek out some that have been successful, figure out what worked for them. You can also find people who weren't successful and figure out what they got knocked for in their budget proposals, things like that, to kind of figure out where that sweet spot is and how you can really be successful in proposing for a grant. Reach out to the organization awarding the grant. Again, with all of PAEA's grants, so I'm just kind of speaking for PAEA here, there is guidance on what you can and cannot put into that budget. There's templates often, things like that. Whoever you're proposing to, reach out to them, make sure that you have a clear picture for what you can and can't include, because again, you don't want that to be the reason why your project is immediately struck or anything like that. And then lastly, just remember, reasonable, aligned, sufficient, feasible, as long as you're adhering to those and meeting whatever other criteria that the organization has put out there, that's what's going to make sure that your budget is actually well tailored to the project that you're trying to undertake, that you're trying to accomplish. So again, those are some good pillars off which to work, so you can really try to make your grant proposal a success. So with that, Denise, I will stop there